In late November 1870, two dusty, weather-beaten prospectors walked into the office of San Francisco businessman George Roberts, carrying a leather bag. They were nervous, secretive. They refused to say where they'd been or what they'd found. Finally, Philip Arnold opened the bag. Inside were rough, uncut diamonds, rubies, sapphires. Enough precious stones, Arnold claimed quietly, to make every man in the room rich beyond imagination. Within 18 months, some of America's wealthiest men, bankers, generals, the founder of Tiffany Co, would invest millions in what they believed was the greatest gem discovery in American history. A diamond field so rich that stones could be plucked from the ground with bare hands. There was just one problem. The diamond field didn't exist. This is the story of the great diamond hoax of 1872, a masterpiece of frontier deception that fooled the sharpest minds in American business. A con so audacious that it involved 2 trips to London, a 4-day blindfolded horseback journey through Wyoming, and a Yale-trained geologist who would become a national hero for exposing it. By the time it was over, Philip Arnold would retire wealthy in Kentucky. John Slack would vanish into history, and the men they'd swindled would learn an expensive lesson about greed, gullibility, and gems that glittered too brightly to be true. Philip Arnold was born around 1829 in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, the same county that produced Abraham Lincoln. He had little formal education. He'd worked as a hatter's apprentice before enlisting in the Mexican-American War. Then, like tens of thousands of other young men, he'd headed west during the California gold rush of 1849. Arnold apparently had some success in the goldfields because he managed to buy farmland back in Kentucky, marry, and start a family. But the frontier kept calling him back. By 1870, he was living in San Francisco, working as an assistant bookkeeper for the Diamond Drill Company, a manufacturer that used industrial-grade diamonds and drill bits. For a bookkeeper, Arnold showed unusual interest in those diamonds. He read technical publications about gemstones. He studied how diamonds formed, where they were found, what they looked like in their natural state. His co-workers probably thought he was just curious. He wasn't just curious. He was planning. His cousin John Slack had followed a similar path, prospecting, mining, working various jobs across the West. The two men knew opportunity when they saw it. And in 1870, opportunity looked like a bag of stolen industrial diamonds mixed with cheap garnets and rubies purchased from sources nobody bothered to document. The timing was perfect. San Francisco in 1870 was a city drunk on mining fever. The California gold rush was still producing. Nevada's Comstock lode had created instant millionaires. South Africa had just announced major diamond discoveries in 1867. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 had opened the West to even more speculation. Everyone believed the next great strike was just around the corner. Arnold and Slack intended to make sure everyone believed they'd found it. Their first mark was George Roberts, a prominent businessman who'd made his fortune in the 1850 gold rush. Arnold had once worked for Roberts as a prospector, which gave him credibility. In February 1871, Arnold and Slack showed up at Roberts' office late in the evening, asking him to store something valuable in his safe until the Bank of California opened in the morning. Roberts was curious. What needed protecting? Arnold and Slack made a show of reluctance. They whispered. They hesitated. Finally, Arnold revealed that the bag contained rough diamonds they'd discovered while prospecting somewhere in the West. They wouldn't say where, just somewhere out there, on a mesa, rich beyond measure. Then they swore Roberts to secrecy. Of course, Roberts immediately told everyone. That was the genius of Arnold's psychology. Make a man promise not to tell, and he'll spread the news faster than any advertisement. Within days, word had reached William Ralston, founder of the Bank of California and one of San Francisco's wealthiest men. Ralston tracked down Arnold and Slack. He was smooth, persuasive. He explained that developing a diamond mine required capital, expertise, connections to Eastern markets. Things two simple prospectors couldn't manage alone. But Ralston could provide all of it, for a share of the profits, naturally. Arnold appeared to consider this. Finally, he agreed to let Ralston send representatives to inspect the diamond field, just to verify the discovery was real. Here's what Arnold and Slack did next. They took the $50,000 Ralston gave them as a down payment, boarded a ship to England, and spent $20,000 buying low-grade, uncut diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires from London gem dealers, cheap stones, flawed, the kind of gems that would never make it into fine jewelry. Then, they returned to San Francisco with a second bag of discoveries, this one supposedly containing 60 pounds of gems worth $600,000. Roberts was ecstatic. Ralston was convinced. They brought in more investors: William Lent, a mining entrepreneur; General George Dodge, a Union Army veteran; Asbury Harpending, a businessman with connections across the West. But these were shrewd men. They wanted authentication before committing serious money. So they took 10% of Arnold's latest haul, the gems he'd just bought in London, and sent them to the most respected jewelry expert in America, Charles Louis Tiffany, founder of Tiffany Company in New York. Tiffany examined the stones with his master jeweler. They were uncut, rough, still in their natural state. Neither Tiffany nor his assistant had much experience with uncut gems. They dealt primarily in finished jewelry. They made their assessment based on size and clarity. Their conclusion: the gems were worth $150,000. In reality, the stones were worth perhaps a few thousand. But Tiffany's name carried weight. If Charles Tiffany said they were valuable, they must be valuable. The investors were now convinced they'd discovered America's answer to the South African diamond fields. They demanded to visit the site in person. Arnold agreed, but with conditions. The exact location would remain secret. The journey would be long and confusing, and the investors would have to hire an independent mining engineer to verify the deposit's authenticity. The engineer they chose was Henry Janin, one of the most respected mining consultants in America. Janin had evaluated over 600 mines and had never made a mistake that cost investors money. His reputation was impeccable. His fee was $2,500 plus expenses and an option to buy 1,000 shares of stock. In June 1872, Arnold and Slack led Janin and three investors, General Dodge, Harpending, and Harpending's English friend Alfred Rubery, on an expedition west. They boarded a Union Pacific train to Rawlins, Wyoming, a tiny railroad town in the middle of nowhere. From there, they continued on horseback. For 4 days, Arnold led them through rough country. He consulted his compass frequently. He appeared to get lost. He climbed hills to get his bearings. The route was deliberately confusing, zigzagging, doubling back, covering 20 miles as the crow flies, but taking 4 days to get there. At times, according to some accounts, the investors rode blindfolded. Harpending later recalled that the party became cross and quarrelsome. Finally, on the afternoon of June 4th, 1872, they arrived at a broad mesa dominated by a cone-shaped mountain to the south. The site was on the Colorado-Wyoming border, about 3.5 miles into Colorado. Arnold suggested they begin digging. Within minutes, Alfred Rubery gave a yell. He held up a diamond, then another, then rubies, sapphires, emeralds. The gems were scattered across the surface and buried just beneath the topsoil. For hours, they collected stones. By the end of the day, they'd filled a sack. Henry Janin, the expert who'd never made a mistake, declared the field wonderfully rich. What none of them realized was simple. Arnold and Slack had spent the winter salting the site. They'd scattered gems across the mesa, pushed stones into anthills and crevices, buried others just beneath the surface. Like parents hiding Easter eggs, they'd created the illusion of natural abundance, and it worked perfectly. Janin returned to San Francisco and delivered his report. The diamond field was legitimate. The deposit was extensive. With proper development, it could produce millions. Arnold collected the $150,000 promised to him after Janin's inspection. Then, he sold his remaining stock to Harpending for $300,000 more. His total take, $550,000, about $13 million in today's currency. He moved his family back to Kentucky that summer. By the time the fraud was exposed, he was safely home, a wealthy man. Meanwhile, the investors formed the San Francisco and New York Mining and Commercial Company. They capitalized it at $10 million. Shares were snapped up by prominent Americans, former Union General George McClellan, who'd run for president against Lincoln, members of the Rothschild banking family, Charles Tiffany himself, buying stock in the company based on gems he'd appraised. A congressman named Benjamin Butler received 1,000 shares for shepherding the General Mining Act of 1872 through Congress, legislation that specifically included diamonds as valuable mineral deposits that could be legally claimed on federal land. Everyone was getting rich, on paper at least. News of the diamond discovery leaked to the press. Newspapers reported that America had its own diamond fields to rival South Africa's. A mini diamond rush began. Independent prospectors headed for Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, anywhere diamonds might be hiding. And that's when everything fell apart. In October 1872, geologist Samuel Emmons was riding a train through California when he encountered Henry Janin. The two knew each other from mining circles. Janin couldn't resist showing Emmons some of the diamonds from the field he'd authenticated. Emmons was suspicious. He reported the encounter to his boss, Clarence King. King was a 30-year-old Yale-educated geologist who'd spent the last 5 years leading the geological exploration of the 40th parallel, a government survey documenting mineral deposits, water resources, and geological formations across 80,000 square miles of the American West, following the route of the Transcontinental Railroad. King had formally reported that no major gemstone deposits existed in that region. If there was a diamond field as rich as Janin described, it would make King look incompetent. Worse, it would call into question the thoroughness of his entire survey. King tracked down Janin in San Francisco and interviewed him. Janin described the site, the cone-shaped mountain, the broad mesa, the 4-day journey from Rawlins. He mentioned that rubies and sapphires had been found alongside the diamonds. That detail caught King's attention. Rubies and sapphires form under completely different geological conditions than diamonds. Finding them together in the same deposit would be like finding seashells and dinosaur bones in the same rock layer, geologically impossible. King suspected fraud. He assembled a team, geologist Samuel Emmons, cartographer A.D. Wilson, and several others, and headed for Wyoming. In bitter cold October weather, they traveled to Fort Bridger, Wyoming, where King's survey team had stabled mules. They rode east for about a week until they reached the Wyoming-Colorado border south of Rock Springs. There, they spotted a cone-shaped mountain matching Janin's description. Near the mountain, they found a water rights claim signed by Henry Janin. They'd found the site. They began searching. Within hours, they were finding gems, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, just as Janin had described. But something was wrong. King found a diamond perched on top of a narrow rock, balanced there. In nature, diamonds form deep underground under extreme pressure and heat. They're brought to the surface by volcanic activity. The idea that a diamond would sit balanced on a rock, exposed to weather for thousands of years, was absurd. For every diamond King found, he found 12 rubies. The pattern was too consistent, too artificial. When they dug deeper than the surface layer, they found nothing, no gems at all. Everything was concentrated in the top 6 inches of soil. The gems themselves were suspicious. They showed tool marks, evidence they'd been cut by human hands, then weathered artificially to look natural. Some still had traces of the diamond cutter's chisel. The stones came from different geological sources: African diamonds, Asian rubies, South American emeralds, all mixed together in one impossible deposit. King realized immediately what he was looking at: the most elaborate salting operation in American history. He and Wilson left camp before dawn, riding 45 miles across desert and mountain to reach Black Butte Station. They caught a train to San Francisco. On the night of November 10, 1872, King went to Janin's hotel. He spent hours explaining what he'd discovered. Slowly, Janin accepted the truth. He'd been fooled. The next morning, King and Janin met with Ralston and the other investors at the Bank of California. King presented his evidence: the suspicious patterns, the impossible geology, the tool marks on the gems, the absence of any deposits below the surface. The investors were stunned. Some refused to believe it at first, but King's reputation was unimpeachable. His evidence was overwhelming. The San Francisco and New York Mining and Commercial Company held its final meeting on November 27, 1872. They confirmed the diamond field was a hoax. They refunded what money remained to shareholders. The company dissolved. The news broke in newspapers on November 25th. The San Francisco Chronicle wrote, "We have escaped, thanks to God and Clarence King, a great financial calamity." The New York Times, which had been skeptical from the beginning, wrote that the most remarkable part was that the swindlers had succeeded in deceiving businessmen and capitalists so proverbially shrewd as those of San Francisco. Ralston alone lost $250,000. William Lent claimed losses of $350,000. Henry Janin's consulting business never fully recovered from the embarrassment. Arnold and Slack were indicted for fraud in California, but never brought to trial. The investors likely wanted to avoid further publicity. Arnold returned some money in an out-of-court settlement, but kept most of his fortune. He lived comfortably in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, where he bought 500 acres of farmland and a 2-story brick house. He even opened a bank. In 1878, he became involved in a business dispute with a rival banker. The argument escalated. Arnold was shot in the shoulder. While recovering from the gunshot wound, he contracted pneumonia and died at age 49. John Slack vanished after the hoax. For decades, his fate was unknown. Then, in 1967, an accountant named Bruce Woodard became obsessed with the story and tracked down records suggesting Slack had worked as a coffin maker in St. Louis, then moved to White Oaks, New Mexico, where he became an undertaker. He died there in 1896 at age 76, leaving an estate of $1,600, a far cry from the fortune he'd stolen. Clarence King became a national celebrity. His role in exposing the hoax made him a folk hero. Preachers used him as an example of scientific integrity and public service. In 1879, he was appointed the first director of the United States Geological Survey, the new federal agency that consolidated all government geological work. He served until 1881, when he nominated his successor, John Wesley Powell, the famous explorer of the Grand Canyon. William Ralston never recovered emotionally or financially from the disaster. In 1875, the Bank of California collapsed under the weight of bad investments and excessive speculation. Ralston resigned. The next day, he went for a swim in San Francisco Bay and drowned. The coroner ruled it an accident, but many suspected suicide. The hoax left behind lessons that resonated far beyond 1872. It demonstrated how easily greed could blind even intelligent people to obvious fraud. It showed that reputation and expertise, like Tiffany's or Janin's, could be manipulated. It proved that the frontier's promise of easy wealth made people vulnerable to elaborate deceptions. And it revealed something about the Gilded Age itself, an era when money moved fast, fortunes were made overnight, and the line between legitimate speculation and outright swindle was often invisible until it was too late. Today, the site where Arnold and Slack salted their gems is still marked on United States Geological Survey maps as Diamond Field. It sits in a remote corner of northwestern Colorado near the Wyoming border. There are no diamonds there. There never were. But if you visit, you can see the cone-shaped mountain, the broad mesa, the landscape that fooled some of America's smartest businessmen into believing they'd discovered the treasure of a lifetime. Philip Arnold understood something fundamental about human nature. Give people what they want to believe in: a diamond field, a path to instant wealth, a chance to be part of something extraordinary, and they'll overlook the obvious questions. How could diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds all exist in one deposit when geology said it was impossible? Why did the gems only appear in the top 6 inches of soil? Why wouldn't Arnold reveal the location unless investors agreed to his terms? The answers were there. King saw them immediately, but the investors didn't want to see them. They wanted to believe in the diamonds, and so they did. Until reality, in the form of a 30-year-old geologist with a surveyor's eye and a scientist's skepticism, rode into their mesa and called their bluff. The Great Diamond Hoax of 1872 wasn't just a swindle. It was a masterclass in frontier psychology, executed perfectly by 2 Kentucky prospectors who understood that sometimes the best way to get rich isn't to find treasure. It's to make people believe you found it. Arnold and Slack didn't discover diamonds in the American West. They discovered something far more valuable: the eternal human weakness for things that glitter.